And joining us now from our Parliament studio is Justice Minister Andrew Little. Good evening, Minister. Are you in any way surprised that considerably more New Zealanders seem comfortable ending a life, more comfortable with that than having a joint?
Oh, look, I think they're two completely separate issues, operating in two completely different realms. I mean, one is about those who meet the very strict conditions of the End of Life Choice Act, that would enable them to make a decision to bring their life to a close early, compared to what we're talking about, a substance that we know is capable of causing harm, that is already in reasonably widespread use, but facing a question about how or if we wanted to put more control on it. In the end, the electorate has made their respective decisions, and for whatever reason, we've got the results that we've got.
Why do you think it didn't get over the line?
The cannabis?
Yes.
Look, I know getting out campaigning and talking to people, it always felt to me as if it was 50-50, and the polls were sort of were pretty varied in terms of their results. I think some people thought that what they were voting on was whether or not we would have cannabis in our communities, as opposed to whether we would control it. Others were concerned whether the provisions of the draft legislation were enough to control the harms that cannabis can bring. But in the end, look, there just wasn't enough support for it.
So you supported it, and we know today the Prime Minister supported it too. So if you believed in it and thought this was the right thing, why weren't you braver? Why didn't you go out there collectively and campaign on it, rather than, the critics would say, sit silently and let this happen?
Well, I don't think you could characterise what we did as sitting silently. In the end, my job as Minister of Justice flowed out of the confidence and supply agreement with the Greens in 2017, which was to hold a referendum on whether or not we should legalise cannabis. I did that. It was a pretty extensive exercise. We put together a draft piece of legislation that called on input from all sorts of experts. We had a cross-party parliamentary working group looking at it, all parties then in Parliament. Had a go at it. We put together a piece of legislation that I think dealt with the issues and the concerns that people had, but allowed for control of a substance that we know can cause harm. And it was pretty clear. In the end, it was for the electorate to decide. But you didn't really push it, did you, Minister? You didn't push it as a campaign thing. You didn't say, OK, Labor wants this change to happen. It's part of our campaign and this is what we want to do. Chloe Swarbrick led the charge, and some people would say maybe she was preaching to the converted, and there possibly would have been benefit in someone appealing to a broader base. Why didn't you take that role, or why didn't Jacinda Ardern take that role? Look, I didn't conceal my preference and the way I was voting, and working on the legislation as I did, leading that project, gave me good information and clear insights. And my critical role was to make sure that there was draft legislation, that the question was framed in a way that meant we could get good information out, that it was simple to understand. We had good collateral information that was available and out there. The indicators from the website traffic indicate that a lot of people got access to that. Way more people went to the cannabis information as opposed to the end-of-life choice information. But in the end, people made their decision, and the polls showed that this was always going to be a roughly 50-50 call, and that's actually what happened, although clearly on the less than 50 on the yes side than on the no side. So there we go.
As you point out, it's pretty tight, roughly 50-50, a little bit to the nose. So you have a significant majority, right? And with that, a mandate. Will you move to make any other changes around drug laws?
Yeah, look, we've got a mandate to govern, but there was this quite discreet exercise around the drug law reform question.
That's legalisation. So in terms of drug law reform, will you move to do anything more?
We have no other plans. We've made some changes to the Misuse of Drugs Act that tilt towards a decriminalisation environment. That is by changing, the way police approach their prosecutorial discretion. But we have no other plans, Minister, on drug law reform.
Is that enough? Well, those changes you made, which have a wider discretion. I mean, how often? Can you give us a percentage for how often that discretion is exercised and people are referred to health facilities rather than a court process?
Well, the information I've had, the most recent information I've had, is that since the law change, roughly 500 people have had a health referral. Now, I don't know what proportion of that is.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the proportion of that relates to. Look, there's no question. We're very serious about that particular law change working. We will have to review it fairly soon and see whether it is achieving what we wanted it to achieve. But to go to the bigger question, is there a mandate for broader drug law reform? Well, this referendum result will tell you not. The issue about decriminalisation...
Not for legalising, but it's not a vote on any other changes, is it?
Well, the question then is, so do you do decriminalisation? And I say actually, to the extent people understand the difference between the two, actually there is not a mandate for material drug law reform. Personally, on the issue of decriminalisation, I don't agree with that. It is a halfway step that creates more problems than it solves. You look at the experience of the Netherlands, ever since they introduced the coffee shop regime, actually their biggest problem, and I spoke to the Netherlands Chief of Police, is they've had to turn a blind eye to the criminal elements supplying the coffee shops where people can use legally. It just creates a huge complex mess that we wouldn't want to replicate. Now really the choice is, do we want to control the substance in our communities, or do we want to hope that what we've got at the moment is working okay? The electorate has decided on the latter. That's what we have to stick with.
The Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor and a panel of experts produced research and commentary on the cannabis referendum. And you're probably really familiar with this, but for our listeners, it stated racial biases mean that the discretion afforded to police may privilege non-Māori and disadvantage Māori. Māori are almost twice as likely as non-Māori to go to court over a first offence, nearly 7 times more likely to be charged. Though police discretion to take health-orientated approach rather than prosecuting those using cannabis, inherent bias in police discretion implied by disproportionate arrests and convictions for cannabis possession for Māori suggests that this law change doesn't address the social inequities as much as legalising cannabis could. Do you believe in that? Do you believe what's stated there?
Yeah, that's come from experts, and we know, and
right.
Even the police hierarchy would admit there are issues about bias in the way they police, not just drug offences, but other offences too.
Sorry to interrupt, Minister, but given you accept that, if you know that's true, that discretion doesn't work because there is inherent bias and Māori are still getting the raw deal here, and given you have a mandate and the power to change something that is inherently racist, are you not part of the problem if you don't change it?
We had an agreement over the time of the last government and the confidence and supply agreement in 2017 to put together a referendum on the question of legalising cannabis. We've done that. And all those issues were debated. All those issues were out to the voting public on the pros and cons of legalising or not. And the voters have voted. I may not like the result. Others may not like the result. That is the result. And in our democracy, and we said beforehand we would be bound by the result, we would honour the result, we have to honour that result. Are there other things we can do to address prosecutorial and policing bias? Of course there is, and we will continue to do that. We've exposed that in the last 3 years in government through the criminal justice system. Of course we've got more work to do on that, and we will. But on the question of legalising cannabis, the electorate has spoken, and we have said we would honour that result, and we have to honour that result.
Appreciate you joining us this evening. That is the Justice Minister, Andrew Little there.